Hey, this is Digital Environment Painting with Jamal Steele, which is me. Let's get started. It's a little bit about who I am. I'm a digital painter, I'm an artist. I draw a lot. I've been drawing cartoons since I was really little, and uh, I've taken a liking to like fantasy artists. So I've been paying a lot of attention to artists that do illustrations for like Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. And I really got into digital painting environments basically. And I've gotten lots of questions about like, yo, Jamal, how do you, how do you paint environments so good and stuff like that. So, I mean, this video just kind of to shed some light on my process and what all of that's all about. So, yeah, hopefully this video clears some stuff up about how I work. Maybe you can get into it too. So yeah, so a little bit about my process, like how we're starting off here. Um, I've got the reference image right up the upper left. So that's the picture I'm trying to draw. I use MapCrunch. It's a really good resource for people that just want to get pretty environments to paint, like nice photos. It's just areas from around the world, random pictures, street views, stuff like that. So I've got my reference image just in the same document just so you guys can see what I'm looking at. It's not like off to another screen or anything, it's right there. So a good bit of this video is me trying to fiddle around with like how this is gonna work, how I can show you guys like both things. But it's all good. So yeah, I've got that in there. I'm just kind of like sketching like what I see, kind of laying out the foundation for what the painting is gonna be. So right now I'm kind of just drawing the mountains, the clouds, nothing really too I'm not trying to be too perfect, too exact. It's just me kind of laying out the scene how I see it. And the beautiful thing about doing digital art is that you can do line work and then you can paint under the line work. Can't really do that with traditional media. uh, so taking advantage of the software here. And yeah, I'm just kind of putting down some color here. It isn't exactly what's in the painting. This is just really so I'm not starting off with like just straight white. Um, kind of get like the base values in there. Just kind of look at what areas are light, what's dark, what's blue, what's green. Just the basic colors to kind of give myself a good starting point. I don't really like working off of just a blank white canvas. It's kind of hard to decide what should be lighter or darker when everything's bright white. So I kind of give myself some color to start with and get right in. So next up, I'm just kind of like blocking out the scene here. I'm just looking at which areas are like what part is grass, what part is sky, what part is mountains, and I'm really just establishing the shapes. I usually get some questions about like layers and all that stuff, so I'm really just kind of keeping each part of the painting on a separate layer. You don't have to work that way, it's just the kind of way that I've found myself working. It's much easier to make edits that way, just kind of keep everything separated. So yeah, I actually do a fair bit of drawing with the lasso tool or the selection tool, whatever you want to call it. It's really easy to get really strong shapes that way, and a good way to get good paintings that have strong shapes that read well. So I use the lasso tool to make sure I get nice, crisp, hard edges, which you can then like color inside of. So I got my grass, I got my road in the front, I got my mountains, and then next I'm gonna put down the basis of this this body of water here. And so I'm keeping my reference in view there, but I'm not really like trying to get the exact colors. I'm just kind of mapping out like the different sections of the painting. Yeah. For the sky though, I think painting sky is really fun. So I am actually trying to get like uh, really good colors for the sky. And what helps really with painting environments is just looking, just paying attention to when you're outside, looking at the world around you. So if you look at the sky, even in like in this photograph here, you can tell, but the sky is like a dome, right? So it's gonna start lighter toward like the bottom, like the horizon line, and it's gonna get like a deeper kind of color, like a deeper blue as you get higher up. So you can see it gets like a darker blue in the center of the sky. And I see a little bit of purple in that photograph in the upper left. I like to exaggerate things a little bit, so I'm gonna put more purple in there. I just like how purple looks in the sky, so I'm gonna put purple there. And I'm just kind of putting these clouds up. At this point, I'm really starting to deviate from the source photo, but this isn't about making it exactly like the photograph. Like, I don't, this is about, you know, having fun, being expressive, and you want to make the painting that you want to make, not what the photo tells you to do all the time, right? So I'm looking at the clouds and the kind of shapes that are going on in the original photo, and I want to spruce it up a little bit. I want to add some more dynamic shapes in there, kind of push the perspective of the clouds a little bit. So you know, it's my painting. I get to do that. And I encourage you to do that too. If you're painting from an image and you think, you know, it would be more interesting if you exaggerate a shape or two, go ahead and do that. No one's like, you know, telling you have to paint this way. So, uh, yeah. So, what am I doing next? Hmm. So I believe I'm gonna get started on this grass next, and grass is by far the most challenging part, right? Because if you look at this field of grass, it's like how do you draw that, right? How do you paint that? So the quick and simple answer is you want to kind of imply detail rather than just like render it all out. Like you don't want to sit here painting every single stroke of grass, right? Like, who does that? So I'm just kind of looking at that part of the picture generally and just looking at like what textures I see there, where I see lights and darks, kind of getting the general color. Like I'm getting this kind of greenish, yellowish kind of vibe when I'm looking at it. And just another technique that really helps is if you kind of blur your eye and you look at that thumbnail little picture up there, like how does it read? Like what areas are rough, what areas are smooth? Like if you can kind of capture the general feel that you get when you kind of blur your eye and look at it, you're probably going to be off to a good start. So that's kind of what I try to do here. Um, so I know this question is going to come up. What brushes are you using? So a lot of artists really dance around this. They say things like, "Oh, brushes don't matter," and to a point, that's kind of true. Um, if you're not that good at painting, an amazing brush set isn't going to save you. But at the same time, once you kind of get a handle of what you're doing, you quickly realize that you know brushes, the different brush shapes and brush textures have different uses, and brushes kind of do matter eventually. So the brushes that I'm using here are ones that kind of give me like a rough texture. You can see like it kind of has kind of gritty vibe. Um, the one I'm using right now, not so much. I could actually do this with like the round brush, the like what I'm painting at this moment. But like generally speaking, I kind of have like a chalky kind of a roughish kind of brush that I use to get the really textured areas. And this brush that I actually got from another concept artist video tutorial like years ago, and you can actually find him on the web. His name is Shadi Safari. Um, he's an artist that worked with Naughty Dog. I think he's working at like One Pixel Brush. You can get his brush set. It's free. It's out there. So just look for it if you really want these brushes. But like you can do this with anything. Like the default brushes that Photoshop comes with, like will give you a brush that's kind of like this one, and like 70 others. So yeah, that's for brushes. Back to the grass. So I'm actually like trying to tough this out here. I'm just doing what I said earlier, looking at like the kind of the direction that like the grass is going in. Like what kind of I'm looking at like what kind of shape language can I used to express this field, right? Because I don't want just a blank, like a boring like shape of grass here. Like it's a flat plane and just like texture everywhere. Like I kind of want to like add my own story to like how this grass is gonna look. So I'm looking at which ways I can sweep the brush to make it more interesting. What direction I can have like the sweeps going in. All that stuff actually like adds quite a bit to your painting. So uh, yeah, you want to like be expressive with how you portray things, even if it's boring like grass. Um, so at this point, I'm grabbing another brush and I'm starting to like mark out the kind of this like dark part in the foreground. It looks like there's a little like ditch here, like a little dash. For some reason, the grass here is showing up a lot darker. So I'm just kind of like grabbing a different color and just kind of mapping that out here. And yeah, using the lasso tool a bit. I think I'm gonna actually just move this up a little bit because it's give myself some more room here. Go back, fill that in a little bit, and just make sure this part is like nice and bold and that stands out. I don't want this to get lost in like the sea of grass. Like I want this, because if you look at the picture, it stands out. So I want it to stand out in my painting too. So going ahead and adding like the kind of the shadows of that grass in the foreground toward the front. And then I realized that, wait a minute, I just want to kind of have that grass come over the road a little bit, and then I'll edit like what it looks like later. So what I like to do with in terms of like shape and all that stuff, I like to kind of like block out a shape and then like lock that layer so you can paint inside of the shape, so you don't have to worry about like breaking that edge anymore. Once you establish like as far as that shape goes, you can paint inside of it without worrying about like messing up the shape that you established. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, just marking where that grass is gonna go, how far it goes, and then I can add like dark, I can add light, I can add yellow, purple. So just going back and refining that edge again, just putting that dark space in there. Just picking different brushes and see like what kind of texture I get and what can help me, because it's grass, all right? It's kind of tough. Uh, yeah. So with I might get asked this question too, like with a color picker, like how am I picking the colors, right? So this is supposed to be for fun, but I do want to kind of train myself. I want to kind of get better at this. So I tend to pick colors on my own. I kind of look at the source image and kind of look at the color that I'm seeing, see if I can kind of get it on my own. I have the hue, saturation, and brightness slider up to the upper right. So I'm using that to kind of manage like the brightness, the hue, and all that. But I don't really like to take the color picker and just pick it out of the photograph. That's I mean, some people say that's cheating. I don't really care what people are saying about it, but to me, it kind of takes the fun out of like figuring out the colors on your own, and then adding colors. Like I want my picture to be more colorful than the photograph, right? So I'm gonna use my own artistic eye and decide what colors go where, regardless of what the photo says. So now I think I've got like a textured chalk brush, and I'm gonna use that to kind of make this look more like a field of grass. I'm really selective about what the texture brush is doing. I don't want to just put the same texture everywhere. Being really like methodical about what goes where. And here I kind of just take off all the layers and just add them back just to see like, am I making progress here? Sometimes you gotta just do that. Just take off the layers and see, has it gotten any better or not? So next up, you see me grab a few grass brushes. Now I know the grass brush has become kind of like infamous. Like, a lot of people say, oh, don't use grass brush ever. And that's mostly true because of how like new people tend to abuse the grass brush. Like the last thing you want to do here is take the grass brush and just rub it all over the field. Like you don't want that. It looks horrible. There's plenty of reasons why nobody wants to paint like that or look at a paint that looks like that. So but I do want that grassy texture. I want it to show up in the areas of focus, and I want the texture to imply the rest of it. You don't want to just take grass and put it everywhere, right? So I'm looking at the areas that need a little help with the detail kind of imply, like, I want the grass to read in areas that it matters, right? So that's mainly in the foreground here, near that telephone pole. You're gonna want to put grass, but not everywhere. So I think I kind of mess around with that a little bit. And then I go back to just looking at this field and like looking at where the dark areas go and how I can imply that this part is kind of bumpy, kind of rough, and like how it gets kind of flat toward the back of it. Yeah, so I think this is coming along pretty well so far. There's different grass brushes. There's some that people have made. I grabbed a few from like my favorite artists that I watch on YouTube. Um, yeah, so that's what I'm doing here. Then I'm looking at certain areas where the grass isn't just plain old yellow or green. Sometimes the grass gets a little like beige, like almost like a white washed out color. So I'm looking at those parts and where I can kind of put those and yeah. So yeah, painting grass, painting a field of grass is pretty tough. So yeah, I'm still kind of getting used to this. So you can see me kind of pull my window closed by by accident. So right now I'm doing the road here, and I want the right brushes to give me that like texture of like pavement, asphalt. Um, you don't want to do this with like a smooth round brush or like the airbrush because you're gonna get like a road that doesn't really read like the street. This is an old busted up road, so I'm just trying to get the color and the textures right. I think you'll probably see me mess around with the opacity and the flow of the brush too. I know I get a lot of questions about like, what's the difference between like flow and opacity? So I've heard one of my old teachers explain it this way, and I think it's the best way to think about it. So opacity is like the transparency, like how well it shows up, and the flow is basically like how wet or dry your brush is in digital speak. So if you were painting traditionally, there's a way you would paint with dry brushes, and there's a way you'd paint with brushes full of paint. So the flow is how full of paint your brush is. So if you turn down the flow, it paints like a dry brush. If you put it on 100, it paints like it's full of paint. So I think that's a pretty good explanation of it. So now I'm kind of going back over that mountain and I'm kind of editing the shapes that are here. It's really important to have like strong shapes in your painting because like shapes are everything, honestly. Like you can hear a lot of artists talk about like shape language and things like that. Basically, shapes can convey like the entire mood of a painting, right? You can sell the whole mood of an environment with just shapes. Like you can see it in video games a lot. Like if you come across an area with like a lot of round hills, round mountains, it kind of feels friendly. Color language plays a bit into that too, but mostly shapes. And then maybe like at the end of the game, there's like a part with like really pointy rocks, like pointy mountains. Everything looks like really like sharp and aggressive. You already kind of feel like this is a dangerous area. So I kind of want a balance of that in this picture. I kind of want like flat, horizontal, plane shapes. But the mountain, I want the mountain to stand out. I want it to be pointy. I want it to be angular. I want it to look like a really strong mountain. So I'm gonna go in there and make sure that those shapes read well. So this is probably the best example of what you'll get to see of like an advantage you get of keeping everything separate. So I started to mark off some of the grass on this mountain, some of the grassy part, or the highlight of it. And then later on, I decided I wanted to change the color of the mountain itself. So since everything was on a separate layer, I kind of just went back to the mountain layer and I was able to paint under that highlight. You can't really do that if you're painting traditionally, or if you just kind of have everything on one layer. So that's one reason why I like to keep everything separate. And next is this phenomenon you can see in real life. It's called atmospheric perspective. It's what happens when you look at things that are really far away in the distance. They kind of look more bluish, kind of grayish. They kind of fade away. So in the source photo, the atmospheric perspective is making that distant mountain look really light blue, and it it helps like convey distance, depth in your painting. If everything is the same value, if everything is like the same color, it kind of flattens out your image, and you don't want that if you're painting like a vast environment. So, um, but of course, since it's me, I want to make my distant mountain purple instead of blue because I like purple and I think it adds to the painting. So I'm gonna make it purple. Here you can see I'm just kind of like adding more detail to that mountain. The mountain is one of the focal points of this image. Like when you look at this picture, you're gonna look right at that mountain, right? Because it's pointy, it's in the middle. So I want that mountain to look really good. There's some areas we can see I kind of like shied away from the detail, like the field of grass. I don't need to put every blade of grass in there, but the mountain, I want the mountain to look good. So, and here I'm kind of messing with the reference picture, trying to get everything in the frame so you guys can see what I'm looking at. I think I mess around with that a bit more. And then I start painting this side mountain here. So what I'm doing here, I'm utilizing something called a clipping mask. So once you establish a shape in Photoshop, you can put another layer on top of it. You can hold Alt, and then you'll have another layer that basically clips to the one under it, right? So using a clipping mask, I can paint inside of the mountain shape that I made. So all that purple that's on top there, I can't go outside of the shape, and that's kind of what I want. I want to make shapes inside of the mountain shape that I just made. Yeah. So, and the picture is really subtle, but I want mine to kind of stand out a little more. Um, so I'm using this kind of bright purple, but it's all separate, so I'm gonna edit it later. Right now, I'm just paying attention to like the shape and how it reads. So, as soon as I get this just right, see, after you lock that layer, you can paint inside of it and not worry about breaking the shape that you already made. So now that I have some like fun little expressive triangles that are in there, some hills, like highlights on that mountain, I'm just looking at the kind of colors that are there, and making it feel as natural as possible. At the same time, be really expressive because I don't want to paint the mountain as it is. I want to represent the mountain in my own way, so to speak. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I don't think it's that fun to kind of like look at a photograph and make it exactly the. I mean, people do that, but I want to see like, can I convey this beautiful picture using a set of shapes and make it expressive and make it something more of my own, right? So in the photograph, it's kind of like off in the distance. It's not too pronounced, but I want my side mountain to be a little more bold, more shapely, I guess. I think I did a good job of that. So now that I've finished with my mountains, I'm gonna come in here and start really making these clouds look cool. So, a lot of beginners get trapped up with clouds. They kind of think of them as these kind of like flat shapes against the sky. You're not gonna have a really good painting if you think of it that way. When you look at clouds, when you really like study how clouds work, they have form, they have mass. They're kind of like these floating masses of water droplets, whatever they are, like in the sky, and they have like an underside, they have a top, so they're gonna have shadows. They're gonna have a place where the light does not hit, and getting all those shadows in the painting is what's gonna give your clouds like that look of realism, that look of form. So what I'm doing is like just looking at the cloud shape there and looking at where shadows would believably fall on my clouds, even though my clouds are a little different. And I'm just blocking that shape out. It doesn't really matter what the color is because I'm going to come in and edit the color later with this brush here. So doing it that way, I use a layer mask. So a mask is a way that you can kind of, it's different than a clipping mask. You can basically hide or reveal a certain layer, right? So what I did was I established the shape of the cloud shadows, put on a clipping mask, hid all of the layer, and then revealed it with this really textured brush. So I can get like expressive brush strokes within the confines of this shape that I established. I really hope that makes sense. Feel free to send me an email or something, or just message me on Facebook if you really don't understand that. I'll be happy to explain. But it's yeah, just to reiterate, it's just a way to get like this kind of really expressive looking like brush strokes within these confined shapes. So like all the texture that I'm putting in, you can see like how I'm not really being too confined with how I'm painting it. I don't have to worry about like keeping that same edge, so I can keep the edge of my shadows and it looks really clean and nice. And you can also edit the colors too. So I'm making it, instead of just putting like, gray shadows, if you have something that's white, the shadow's gonna be gray. So my shadows are a little bluer, a little more purple, just because, I want to make it nice. I don't want to just make it exactly what the photograph looks like. I think I've said that enough times. So right now we've got some kind of like floating algae looking thing going on here in this river. So I'm kind of just using the lasso tool to just map out where that's gonna fall and what that looks like, and just putting a color down. I'm gonna edit that color later. Just once again, really focusing on the shape that makes. And I see some holes in the picture, so I'm adding some holes, and then looking at how that looks after I cleared that out. I'm kind of neatening it up a little bit. I don't want to focus on this area too much because, looking at the picture, this part doesn't really stand out too much. So it's just something to add. It's just, a little detail. So I don't believe I spend too much time on this. But at the same time, this is a part of the picture. So I'm really focusing on like the shape of this and the color of it too. The shapes, just because like shapes play such a big role in the mood of your image. So I want to make sure the shapes are just right, and the color too, because even if it's just some like brown muck floating on top of the water, I want that brown muck to look really good. So yeah, make sure those colors pop. Next, I am painting this lake. And so water is really tricky, right? Water is tricky. But the easy way to think about water is basically a reflective surface, a really reflective surface. So anything that is above the body of water is going to be reflected into it. So back here, this mountain is going to be reflected into the water below it. And on the other side, that cliff is going to be reflected too. Now, water isn't blue per se, but in this image, in this picture reference too, what's directly above the body of water is this blue sky. So here, that water is going to look really blue. If it was stormy, it was a stormy day or overcast, it had gray skies and it looked like it was going to rain, that water would be gray because what's above it is a bunch of gray clouds. So hope that helps. When you have a body of water in a painting, it's really, if it's a still body of water, it's going to be really reflective. Now, if you got like a waterfall or something, and you got all that like spray coming, that's different. You got different colors going on there. But right here, a really flat, still body of water, just think of it as a big mirror that reflects what's above it. So I'm not quite done with this field of grass here. I come back in with uh, a scatter brush. I think it's a brush that kind of gives you leaf petals, and I kind of use that to imply some of the flowers that are in the field. And then I come over to this utility pole and add that uh, line to the pole there. I intentionally put a little curve in mind because, like, why does it have to be perfectly straight? Like, I want to add a little swoop to it. All that stuff gives your painting more whimsical feel. Like, it's more playful. It's not so like stiff and rigid. And next we get to the house. All right, so this part was a pain, but we get through it. What I use for the house basically is a lot of lasso tool. So I'm using the lasso tool a lot to really get those like hard defined shapes, get those like hard edges because it's a geometric shape. It's a house, right? So I don't want to get in there with a painterly brush and start like painting this house. And the lasso tool or the selection tool, whatever you want to call it, it leaves no room for error. So you literally can't paint outside of the shape that you drew. So I really want, like, when you have so much going on in an environment, you have grass, you have clouds, sky, water, all that. It's really easy to start painting a house in it, and it gets lost, right? You can't even like really notice it. So one thing that helps with that is making sure that your edges are really straight and crisp and that your values read, right? So right now you can see me doing a value check. Basically what that is in painting, it means that you don't have too many bright things clustered together and you don't have too many dark things clustered together, right? If you want to show that something's bright in a painting, you make sure that all of the surrounding area is darker, and vice versa, right? It works the same way the other way. So right now I'm looking at, like, because I don't really have the best house here, right? I'm kind of struggling a little bit. So I want to make sure, or I'm looking at like, well, why isn't this house reading, right? Is it the shapes that are funky, or is it, do I have too many bright colors next to each other? So um, I'm starting to look more at the house. Like, you really want to pay attention to your reference. One of my favorite teachers told me years ago, like, if you're painting something from reference, you want to look at the reference even more than you're looking at your own painting, right? So pay a lot of attention to what you're drawing from. And I just realized that, like, a lot of my colors are just off. I'm starting to imagine colors. I'm not really using the colors that are there. So I'm looking, okay, the front of this house is a kind of beigeish, almost bluish color. The roof is this like dark bluish gray. I'm really making sure that the colors are what are in the picture, and then making sure that my picture works based on that. I don't want to be inventing colors here, especially like not when it's this tricky, right? If you're in the clouds, you can do whatever you want, right? But with the detail spot, the house, you want to make sure that looks good. So I'm really making sure that this roof reads. There's a lot happening here in this little spot. Um, but yeah, next I'm using the square selection tool to kind of imply some windows here. Um, I'm making sure that that right side of the house, which is catching all the sunlight, is like the brightest part. So I want that part to stand out. Adding my little window here. And right now, this is the only time I really zoom in on the painting. I don't want to talk about zooming in. Uh, so basically, when you're doing an environment, you want to make sure the environment reads as a whole. You can't really see it from the way that this video is cropped, but maybe, I think earlier on you could have seen it. I have this window in the upper right corner called the navigator, and it basically gives you a thumbnail of what your image looks like. And you want to always make sure that your thumbnail reads good. Like, if your image looks good in the thumbnail, then it'll look good when you add all the details. But if the thumbnail looks kind of rough, it looks really bad, you want to make sure that those shapes read well, the values read well, and that your image reads well as a whole before you start zooming in. Because what a lot of people do when they're just starting out, they'll kind of have a drawing and then they'll zoom in on this one part and make that one part look really pretty, and then when you're looking at the rest of the image, it's like, well, what happened over here, you know? Um, so the only time I really zoom in actually is when I'm about to do a detail part, right? And in this example, it happens to be like near the end. So details aren't really that important until your image reads well as a whole. So yeah. So now I'm just looking at like where the shadows are falling on this part of the house. Really taking the time to make this part look good. And it's just a house, but because everyone knows what a house looks like immediately, like if that house looks funky, it's just gonna look weird, right? So I want to make sure the house looks good. So right now I zoom back out and I start adding the bushes that I see in the front of the house, and I'm using an intentionally a color that's intentionally too dark right now because I just want it to stand out. It's on its own layer and I can edit the shape of that later, but I just want to make sure it reads well, like it's the right scale. I'm not adding like a giant tree or anything. And then after I'm sure that it's what I want it to look like, I can kind of add some of the light that's hitting that bush, and then add some shadows over here. I'm gonna go ahead and take an unusually long time to make sure these shadows are just right, because like, this is the detail spot, right? Like when you look at this picture, the first thing you're gonna see is that mountain, and you're gonna look at these houses over here. You're not really gonna pay attention to the grass or that mountain off to the side. You're gonna look at the house, and if the house looks weird, some part of your brain is gonna be like, oh, "What's going on here? That doesn't look like a real image." So, making sure that I get this just right. Another thing that really helps out if you're doing environments is even when you're doing like shadows, dark shadows, you never really want to add like just straight black to an image, right? Um, yeah, just in paintings and in real life, like the actual color black is like really hard to find, even if you're looking in the shadows and stuff. Shadows are usually like bluish or purplish or a dark color, but they're rarely just stark black. So when people are using black for shadows, even in like character drawings, sometimes it's just a little bit too much. Um, but character drawings is probably for another video. We're gonna do character art later. Right now we're doing environment paintings, and you saw me just copy that house. So another big part about painting digitally is just recognizing the medium that you have, the kind of advantages it gives you. And we're using Photoshop, so I already drew the house once. I'm not gonna draw it again. So I just kind of copy that house over, flip it the other way, squash it down a little bit. Like it's Photoshop. You can do that. And I'm gonna make that roof a little darker. I copied it, but I don't want it to look exactly the same. And I think I'm doing like a little check here, making sure that things are as they should be. I'm doing a little layer management. I had an instructor call that layer hygiene. You didn't want to have like bad layer hygiene. I thought that was funny. So that's me making sure I have a good layer hygiene, making sure everything lines up. So this part of the picture you can't really even see, but I give it a driveway and I call it a day. So yeah, that's digital environment painting. That's my process. So hopefully you'll try it out. You'll give your hand at it and see how you do. Anyway, that's it. Peace out.